Garrett Wilson is potentially special. Dude, Garrett Wilson's just, I mean, he's like he's freaky sometimes the way he can move.
The guy's got like 1 million air yards. I think Elijah Moore is a special player, man. But he is not this team's number one.
Look at the release.
There's your separation.
Great route.
Stutter and go. Gets by clean.
That is unbelievable.
Maybe the greatest catch I've ever seen.
I know that you're excited about Garrett Wilson, but man, you look at this pass catching trio there in New York, and all of a sudden, again, we talk about a franchise that last year I thought had an okay duo in Elijah Moore and Corey Davis. Now with the addition of Garrett Wilson, it's a trio that is really, really good. And even Joe freaking Flacco, my guy, is putting up numbers, dude. Like, what is happening here? But this trio there in New York, I think, is certainly helping lift the aerial attack there in New York.
Joe Flacco's dropped back 109 times so far this year. What year is it? You know, in
60 times in game one. It's crazy. Yeah, go ahead.
It's nuts. Yeah, obviously, like I said, some of that is game script. They were trailing. They've been, trailing kind of throughout the first 2 weeks, which, no surprise. But on Garrett Wilson, we had our rookie rankings show coming into this year, kind of like trying to project playing time. And I tiered Garrett Wilson pretty low there because I know, and it had nothing to do with him as a player, but it had everything to do with like, hey, I think the Jets are kind of loaded at wide receiver. They've got Elijah Moore, who I'm a huge fan of. Corey Davis is like a pretty fine veteran receiver. I thought they'd give Braxton Berrios more time, but Garrett Wilson, man, just gave Braxton Berrios the freaking stiff arm in week 2. Garrett Wilson is potentially special. And I mean, he looks special so far. You've got for our YouTube viewers, you've got the route success rate chart from him as a prospect. All green, pretty much, man. I mean, like a freaking Christmas tree there. He just gets open at all 3 levels of the field. It's another thing I said today to Andy Behrens, James. I said, you know how everybody's like all gassed up about Kadarius Toney all the time? Like, hey, man, like this guy, Kadarius Toney's got great talent. Look at what he does in the open field. Well, if you could imagine Kadarius Toney, but he could run routes, that's Garrett Wilson. By the way, like Garrett Wilson is unbelievable in the open field. Among prospects that have been charted the last 2 years in reception perception, Garrett Wilson ranks number 1 in the amount of in-space attempts when he's out in the open field that he broke multiple tackles on, and among prospects number 3 in success rate versus zone coverage. Like he can get open against zone, can make plays in the open field, and I think that's what you've seen so far. We could talk Elijah Moore obviously as well, but so far what you've seen from Garrett Wilson is he's kind of playing as that layup receiver right now. He's been in the slot on 50% of his snaps last week against the Browns. They're kind of getting him in space. Like he's kind of getting more of those layup looks, whereas Elijah Moore is kind of running the more difficult routes as the X receiver around the boundary, deep down the field, intermediate. By the time this podcast is up, I should have some in-season tracking data on receptionperception.com on both of these receivers. And I think the role comparison is really the interesting part of it, because both these guys are extremely talented, but dude, Garrett Wilson's just, I mean, he's like he's freaky sometimes the way he can move.
You got to credit the coaching staff too, because a lot of coaching staffs don't have that kind of like, I don't know, imaginative, spirit to kind of say, all right, Garrett Wilson, who played a lot outside there at Ohio State, and he's got that 4.38 speed. You spent the top 10 pick on him, or you might say, okay, well, we're just going to kick Elijah Moore inside. It's like, no, they're trying to.
Because he was a pure slot at Ole Miss. Like he almost exclusively ran out of the slot in college.
That's exactly right. So yeah, no, I think they've been relatively creative, much to my surprise there in New York. Trying to get these 3 guys on the field, honestly. Corey Davis, I think, led the way in targets week 1, kind of took a little bit of a backseat, obviously made a huge splash play to kind of open the door for that comeback there in week number 2. But yeah, man, he's not going away in this offense either, by the way. You know what I mean?
No,
he is in the mix too. The other thing I'll say about Garrett Wilson too, it's like, okay, yeah, he's running out of the slot a bunch. The guy's got like 1 million air yards. He had like almost like 400 air yards or something week 2. You're like, what? If you guys aren't that familiar with air yards, it's like if you get to like 120 That's really good. That's like the equivalent of like, I don't know, when we're talking about volume, it's like the equivalent of like 10 targets, you know? So like when you get to like 120 air yards, that's really good. He was not just surpassing 200, he was like up at like 300 something. It was insane, the amount of air yards that Garrett Wilson was seeing there in week number 2. All right, so let me ask you about this, because a lot of us, we really wanted to believe in Elijah Moore, and we think the world of Elijah Moore. I think Elijah Moore is a special player, man.
Me too.
I think he's an awesome, awesome player. But there's no getting around it. He is not this team's number one. How do you explain it?
Yeah, well, number one, it has been 2 weeks. So I would say if these guys are closer, the problem is Corey Davis isn't, and I don't say problem from a fantasy angle. It's problematic that they have other guys involved here. This isn't like, it isn't like a Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill like we talked about at the top of the show. They have other dudes in the mix. Tyler Conklin has been in the mix at tight end. The running backs have been in the mix as receivers. And we also, by the way, have questions about the quarterback. Like it's Joe Flacco right now. It's going to be Zach Wilson eventually. How good is Zach Wilson? I mean, by the way, if Zach Wilson can't be good with these dudes,
I know
he ain't going to be good. I think these guys could be a 1A, 1B. I hate being put in a position where it's like, which one is the better receiver? They're both really, really good players, you know?
Okay.
And I do think that Garrett Wilson brings something to the table that Elijah Moore does not. They're both special, great separators. You know, Elijah Moore's rookie was one of these guys who clears 75% success rate versus man and 80% success rate versus zone. Those guys are great, usually great receivers in the NFL in reception perception. We just talked about and showed on the screen Garrett Wilson's route success rate chart. He gets open at all levels of the field. But Garrett Wilson, I think, is a little freakier in tight coverage. Like, he can make those plays away from his body more so than Elijah Moore can. And he is no question, like Elijah Moore can be a player that he can be a guy that makes plays in space because he's fast and explosive, but he's not as bendy. He's not as aggressive as a tackle breaker as Garrett Wilson is. So that's, by the way, that's why one of these guys went 10th overall and the other one went in the second round of the draft. Like, I think these guys are both going to be great players, but there's no question that Garrett Wilson brings certain things to the table that Elijah Moore does not.